Hello everybody. Recently I went on my routinized weekly photo walk and I wanted to capture the sunset. I wanted to take beautiful golden hour photos, silhouettes, and then I stepped outside at like roughly 6 p.m. and to my disappointment the sun had already set. And didn't we just have summer? And also since I moved to Vienna, which is so far east, the sun here is actually setting so much earlier, just as a reference. Before I lived in the Netherlands, where the sun is setting like roughly an hour later than here, or even more. So it's all really confusing to me. And as the days are getting shorter and the nights are getting longer, I thought we would do a video about low light photography. And in this video, I'm gonna cover how you can nail your low light photography for really great results. And if you think this is a video for beginners, I will mention a few very basic things. But even if you're an advanced photographer, you should probably stay tuned because for every point I will go through in this video, I will also cover an advanced feature I want you to try in your low light photography to make your low light photography stand out. And with that being said, let's jump into it. Alright, so the first aspect of low light photography I want to cover is shutter speed. And the mistake I see many beginners do is that they either have a shutter speed that's way too slow or a shutter speed that's way too high. We will try to find a balance between a shutter speed that's not too fast, but also not too slow. And usually a rule of thumb I use a lot for my own photography is to use a shutter speed of around 1/2 times your focal length. So for instance, for the B-roll you're seeing right now, I used my Fuji 50mm f2. My focal length is 50mm. So the math would look like 1/2 times 50mm, meaning that you need to have a shutter speed of 1/100 to keep your frame, first of all, steady, but it's usually also 1/100, it's sufficient to keep your subjects that are moving in your frame crisp and clear. Of course, if there is a faster moving subject, you will want to have a shutter speed that's a little bit higher, let's say 1/200 of a second, but most of the time, if you're, for instance, photographing a walker, it's usually sufficient to go even lower than 100 of a second, let's say 1/60 of a second, for instance, and it's really up to you to try what shutter speed you can handhold and what shutter speed is sufficient to effectively freeze motion in your scene. And if that's too boring for you when it comes to choosing the right shutter speed, I invite you to become a little bit creative with your shutter speed. So you can, for instance, experiment a little bit with slower shutter speed. So let's say, for instance, a scooter passes by and you want to photograph it. And I just told you to drop your shutter. So let's say, for instance, you drop it to 1/25 of a second. Well, in that case, you will want to take your camera, follow the biker around. Let's say your biker is coming right now and you're following it, yeah, making sure it's in focus. And as you move with the biker, you will see that in the end, the photo is going to look very interesting because your biker is going to be roughly in focus, while your background, and especially the highlights in your background, will create these interesting trails. And that really emphasizes movement in your shots. Alternatively, another thing you can try is to take an equally low shutter, let's say 1/15 of a second. And as you shoot at such low shutter speeds, you might, for instance, look for somebody waiting for a bus and waiting for a car to either pass in front of the person standing or in the back of the person standing. And now, if you look at your results, you will see that while your person is not going to move a whole lot, you will have these funny light trails in the foreground, really making this contrast between your standing, static person and the moving cars and the light trails in the fore or in the background. So feel free to just experiment a little bit with your shutter speed. The second important element of getting great low light photography is your aperture. And by definition, low light means that there is little light available in your scene, meaning that you will want to maximize the light gathering capability of your camera. So how do we do that with regards to aperture? Well, on your lens, you will want to make sure to select the aperture that's the widest possible. So for instance, if we take again the example of my 50mm f2 lens, you will want to put it on the lowest f number, which in this case is f2. Your lens, for instance, might only open to f4, but there is also lenses that open to f1.4. In any case, for the most ideal result, open it to the maximum. And now you might think, how boring. I've been shooting in low light since years, and of course I shoot at f2. I actually want you to try something that arguably sounds a bit counterintuitive. I want you to shoot at a stop-down aperture. Let's say, for instance, f11 to f16. And now, if it rains, it's gonna be unavoidable that some droplets are gonna make it onto your front glass element. And now, if you try to take a shot and there is a bright light source hitting your front glass element, will actually make these little droplets on your aperture visible. And by doing this, you will see that it creates a really, really fun effect. And if you combine these interesting artifacts that are created by shooting stop down and these droplets in front of your lens, it will allow you to create very interesting photos that will definitely make your photos stand out from the rest. All right, the last feature we need to talk about is ISO. And this feature is absolutely crucial to master if you want to be great at low light photography. And it's arguably also the feature that most people, especially beginners, are most scared of when it comes to low light photography. Because most photographers will tell them, oh yeah, don't raise your ISO to more than 1600, because if you do, it's going to introduce so much noise into your scene. But in reality, and especially when it comes to low light photography, sometimes you have moments in which your aperture is wide open, in which you cannot reduce your shutter speed any further because it's going to introduce motion blur, and in which you simply have to raise your ISO. And just raise it, yeah? Be that 1600, 3200, it doesn't matter. Because what are you probably gonna do with your photos? You're gonna probably publish them on social media, maybe. You're maybe just gonna keep them for yourself. Are you gonna zoom into your photos at 400%? Probably not. Are you gonna publish these photos and print them 3 by 2 meters on your wall? Probably not either, right? And worst case, if you deem the noise to be too bad in your photo, just use Lightroom denoise or use Topaz, or there is so many great denoise photos that, in my opinion, ISO these days is not really an issue anymore. And one final tip I can give you for low light photography, I usually set my ISO dial on my camera to auto. So I let the camera decide what ISO level it deems necessary to properly expose my low light scene. And if you use your ISO setting in Auto 2, you will want to use exposure compensation to just reduce the exposure to -1 or -1 and a third of a stop. Because often, at least what I encounter on my Fujifilm cameras, is that the scene that the camera exposes at 0 exposure compensation is actually brighter than the scene was in reality. So you will want to just slightly underexpose by -1 or even -2 stops, because first of all, it's gonna look closer to reality. And second, especially if you use a higher ISO, it could be that your highlights are gonna blow out, which are gonna be irrecoverable, especially at higher ISOs. But since we underexpose our night shots a little bit, this means that we will properly expose the highlights and we will easily be able to recover those shadows in post. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or if you've learned something new today, make sure to like the video, and you might even consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoy the content I generally do on this channel. And stay tuned, because I have planned weekly videos on topics like editing, composition, camera settings, and gear, so stay tuned for more. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.